Late in the afternoon of the 2nd of September, 31 BC, in the middle of a sea battle off the western coast of Greece, 60 ships suddenly broke away from the fighting, raised their sails, and ran for open water. At the head of them was a ship with a purple sail. Purple was the color of royalty, and only one person in that fleet was entitled to it. The ships were Egyptian, and the woman on the lead ship was Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, the richest and most powerful woman in the world. She was leaving. In the middle of the battle, with the fighting still going on, she took her squadron and fled south toward Egypt and did not look back. And a few minutes later, the man commanding the entire fleet, Mark Antony, one of the two most powerful men in the Roman world, a general who had spent his whole life refusing to abandon his soldiers, saw the purple sail running for the horizon, left his own flagship, climbed into a smaller and faster vessel, and chased after her. He left his fleet. He left his army. He left the battle. He followed the woman. The ships he left behind fought on for a while, leaderless, and then they were surrounded and burned, and by nightfall the war for control of Rome was effectively over. Within a year, both Antony and Cleopatra would be dead, Egypt would be a Roman province, and the young man who won that day would make himself the first emperor of Rome. For 2,000 years, people have asked the same question about that afternoon. Why did she run? Was it betrayal? Was it cowardice? Was it a plan? Did she abandon him, or did he abandon everything for her? The answer is not simple, and the people who wrote it down had every reason to lie. This is the story of the Battle of Actium, and of the most famous flight in naval history. If you want more naval history told this way, subscribing helps us keep making it. To understand that afternoon, you have to understand that Actium was the end of something enormous, the last battle of a civil war that had been tearing Rome apart for more than a decade. It started with a murder. In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome, and the most powerful man in the world was suddenly gone, and everyone around him began fighting over what he left behind. Two men rose above the rest. One was Mark Antony. He was Caesar's right hand, a soldier's soldier, physically enormous, charismatic, a brilliant battlefield commander, and, by every account, a man who led from the front and was loved by his troops for it. When Caesar died, Antony was the obvious heir to his power. He was a grown man at the height of his reputation. The other was a teenager. Gaius Octavius, we call him Octavian, was Caesar's great-nephew, and in his will, Caesar had adopted him and made him his heir. He was 18, sickly, physically unimpressive, no kind of soldier. On paper, he was nothing next to Antony. But he had two things. He had Caesar's name, which was worth more than any army in Rome, and he had a friend named Marcus Agrippa, who happened to be one of the finest military minds Rome ever produced. Octavian's genius was not on the battlefield. It was in knowing exactly who to trust to win his battles for him, and in a gift for propaganda that has rarely been equaled in all of history. For a while, these two men, along with a third who barely mattered, divided the Roman world between them. Octavian took the west, Rome itself, and the western provinces. Antony took the east, the wealthy, ancient, Greek-speaking half of the empire. And in the east, Antony met Cleopatra. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, the descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals, and she was not the seductress of legend so much as she was a shrewd and ruthless head of state sitting on the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. She had already had a relationship with Julius Caesar and a son by him. Now she and Antony became allies and lovers, and their partnership fused the military power of Rome's east with the bottomless wealth of Egypt. To Octavian, back in Rome, this was a gift, because Octavian could not simply declare war on a fellow Roman. That was another round of civil war, and Rome was sick to death of civil war. But he could declare war on a foreign queen. And so he built one of the most effective propaganda campaigns in history around the idea that Antony had gone native, that he had been bewitched by an Oriental seductress, that he had stopped being a Roman and become the puppet of a scheming Egyptian woman who meant to rule Rome from Alexandria. He even got hold of what he claimed was Antony's will and read it aloud in Rome, pointing to the parts where Antony asked to be buried in Egypt, beside Cleopatra. It worked. Rome declared war on Cleopatra, pointedly not on Antony, though everyone understood what that meant. And in this propaganda lies the first warning for our question. Because nearly everything written about Cleopatra afterward, including the story of why she fled at Actium, comes down to us through the version of the man who needed her to be a villain. By the summer of 31 BC, the two sides had come together on the western coast of Greece, near a promontory called Actium. Antony had the bigger force on paper, something like 500 ships, many of them enormous, heavy, towering war galleys, some with reinforced hulls and fighting towers, bristling with catapults and archers. 70,000 infantry, the wealth of Egypt behind him, Cleopatra's treasure funding the whole enterprise. He set up camp on the southern side of a narrow strait, leading into a large gulf, the Ambracian Gulf, and there he waited. Octavian arrived from the north with a smaller fleet, around 400 ships and 80,000 infantry. And with him came Agrippa, and it was Agrippa who won this war, though Octavian's name is on it. Because the battle everyone remembers, the sea fight on the 2nd of September, was not really where Actium was decided. It was decided in the weeks before, and it was decided by that word that wins most wars and gets remembered in none of the songs: supply. Agrippa took Octavian's nimble fleet and went to work on Antony's supply lines. He seized the bases and islands to the south that Antony depended on to bring food up from Egypt and the east. And slowly, methodically, he strangled Antony's enormous army where it sat. An army that cannot be fed is a corpse that has not fallen over yet. Antony's camp, trapped on the wrong side of the strait, cut off from resupply, began to die. Not in battle, from hunger and from the diseases that come with a large body of men sitting still in an unhealthy place through a Mediterranean summer. Malaria and dysentery moved through the camp. Men began to desert, not a trickle, but a flood, and not just common soldiers. Antony's allied kings began slipping away to Octavian. One of his most senior Roman officers, a man named Ahenobarbus, defected. The rot was reaching the top. Antony's great army was falling apart without a battle being fought, and he knew it, and he had to do something before there was nothing left to do anything with. He had lost so many men to disease and desertion that he could no longer even crew all his ships. He had to burn some of his own fleet before the battle, simply because he had no one left to row them. So a council was held in Antony's camp, and the commanders argued about what to do, and the argument they had is the first clue to the mystery of what happened next. Some of Antony's Roman officers wanted to abandon the fleet entirely, burn the ships, march the army inland, and fight Octavian on land, where Antony was still a great general and where a battle might still be won. Cleopatra argued against it. She wanted to use the fleet. And here the ancient sources start to disagree with each other, because they are already arguing about whose fault the coming disaster was. What we can reconstruct is this: the decision that was actually made was not really a plan to win a sea battle. It was a plan to break out of one. Antony's fleet was trapped in the Gulf. His army was dying. Whatever slim hope remained lay in getting his best ships, and above all, Cleopatra's squadron, which carried the war chest, the treasure of Egypt that could buy a new army, out of the trap and away to Egypt, to fight another day from a position of strength. That is the crucial thing to hold on to, and it is the thing the legend erases. Before the battle ever began, the plan may already have been to run, not to win, to escape, to punch a hole in Octavian's blockade and get the treasure and the core of the fleet, through it and away. If that is true, then what looks like betrayal in the middle of the battle was not a betrayal at all. It was the plan working. On the morning of the 2nd of September, Antony brought his fleet out of the strait and into the open water, and formed his line, and Cleopatra's squadron of around 60 ships took position behind the main body. In the rear, which is exactly where you would put the ships you intend to get away, held back from the fighting, ready to run when the gap opened. For hours, the two fleets fought the strange, grinding battle of the ancient world at sea. This was not ships sinking each other with gunfire. That was 17 centuries away. This was floating siege warfare. Ships grappled together, and marines fought hand-to-hand across the decks, and archers and catapults hurled arrows and stones and fire. Antony's ships were bigger and higher, and hard to board. Octavian's, under Agrippa, were lighter and faster, and worked in packs, several darting in on a single heavy galley, staying out of grappling range, shooting it full of fire. And here is another myth worth killing while we are here. The popular version says this was a clash of nimble little Roman boats against Cleopatra's lumbering Egyptian monsters. In truth, the two fleets were not that different. Both were mostly medium galleys, and the fight was closer and more even than the legend allows, at least at first. Antony tried to extend his line to the north to turn the edge of Octavian's fleet, and as the fleets stretched and maneuvered, gaps began to open in the formations. And in the early afternoon, one of those gaps opened in front of Cleopatra's squadron. She took it. The 60 Egyptian ships raised their sails, and raising sails in the middle of a battle is itself a sign, because ships fought under oars, with their masts often left ashore. Sail meant flight, meant a run for the open sea, and Cleopatra's squadron drove through the gap and out into open water and turned south, the purple sail of her flagship at the front. Now, everything depends on how you read what she just did. If you believe Octavian's version, the version that most of the ancient sources inherited, and the version that came down through 2,000 years of retelling, then this was the moment a frightened woman lost her nerve and abandoned her lover to save herself. Betrayal, cowardice, the Egyptian running from the fight and dragging Rome's greatest general down with her. But look at it again, with what we actually know. Her squadron was held in reserve in the rear in exactly the position you use for a planned breakout. She ran the moment a gap appeared, which is exactly what a planned breakout looks like. She was carrying the treasure of Egypt, the one asset that could fund a future war, and getting it out of the trap was the entire point of the exercise. One modern historian put it bluntly. She was not fleeing, she was executing her assigned role. And she did it well. She might, he said, have deserved a medal for it. The sources themselves are at war over this, and it is worth being honest about how divided they are. Some ancient writers say flatly that she deserted him. Others put the blame entirely on Antony for choosing to follow her instead of staying with his men. Plutarch, the most famous source, tries to have it both ways. He describes the breakout in tactical terms and then can't resist adding that Antony followed her as though his soul were bound to her body, dragged along like a man who had lost all reason. And the very first writer to accuse Cleopatra outright of desertion was a partisan of one of her enemies. The people telling this story had sides. What is not in dispute is what Antony did next. And this is where even the most sympathetic reading turns dark. Because whatever the plan was, when Antony saw Cleopatra's ships breaking away, he abandoned everything to follow her. He left his flagship. He transferred to a smaller, faster ship, took a handful of vessels with him, and chased the purple sail south, leaving the main body of his fleet, dozens of ships, thousands of men, still fighting, still locked in battle, suddenly without their commander. Even if the breakout was the plan, this was not supposed to be the whole fleet's fate. The idea had been to save the core and the treasure while the rest broke free or fought clear. Instead, the commander simply vanished from the battle, and the ships he left behind fought on without him, not knowing he was gone until the truth spread through the fleet. The general has left, the Egyptians have left. We have been abandoned. And a leaderless fleet that believes it has been abandoned does not last long. Some of them kept fighting into the evening, some turned back. Agrippa's ships closed in with fire and held the water through the night, and by the next morning the rest had surrendered. The ships, too shattered to sail, were burned where they floated, off Actium. Around 5,000 men died. 300 ships were taken. and Antony was somewhere to the south on a fast ship catching up to a purple sail. The sources give us one more image from that flight, and it is the saddest thing in the whole story. When Antony finally caught Cleopatra's ship and was taken aboard, he did not go to her. He went to the bow of the ship alone and sat down and put his head in his hands and stayed there like that for 3 days, not speaking to her, not speaking to anyone. Whatever had just happened between them, whether it was a plan that went wrong or a betrayal or a panic, the man who came aboard that ship was broken by it. He had spent 30 years building a reputation as a commander who would never leave his men, and he had just left thousands of them to burn, and he knew it, and everyone would know it. The soul of his public life was gone. He sat at the bow with his head down, and Egypt got closer. Actium was not the end of the war, technically. It was the end of the hope. Antony still had a large army on land near Actium, undefeated, waiting for orders under one of his officers, a general named Canidius. But when the news spread that Antony had fled the battle chasing the Egyptian queen, that army did the arithmetic. Their commander had abandoned his fleet. He had run. Antony sent word for the land forces to pull back into Asia and wait, but the orders meant nothing now. Within days, most of that army surrendered to Octavian without a fight, and Canidius himself slipped away. There was no longer anything to fight for. The desertions that had begun before the battle became a landslide after it. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria and tried to prepare a last defense, but it was hopeless, and Antony seems to have known it. The sources describe him sunk in despair, drinking, unable to act. When Octavian finally closed in on Egypt the following summer, the last of Antony's forces melted away, deserting to the winning side. And then came the ending that Shakespeare would immortalize. Antony, hearing a false report that Cleopatra was already dead, ran himself through with his own sword. The report was wrong. He was carried, dying, to where she was hiding, and died in her arms. Cleopatra, rather than be taken to Rome and paraded through the streets as a trophy in Octavian's triumph, killed herself soon after. By the bite of an asp, an Egyptian cobra, according to the famous tradition, though modern historians increasingly suspect it was poison quietly administered. She was the last pharaoh. With her death, 3,000 years of Egyptian independence ended, and Egypt became a possession of Rome, the personal property, in effect, of the man who had beaten her. That man was the real winner of Actium, and he understood exactly what he had won. Octavian had gained the entire Roman world. There was no rival left standing, and he was careful, brilliantly careful, not to make Julius Caesar's mistake. He did not call himself king or dictator. He gave power back to the Senate on paper and let them beg him to keep running things, and took the modest-sounding title of first citizen and a new name, Augustus. In practice, he was the sole ruler of Rome, the first Roman emperor, and the republic that had lasted 500 years was finished. It had ended, really, on the water off Actium. The poets of his new regime celebrated the victory as the salvation of Rome from a mad foreign queen who had meant to enslave them. That was the official story, and it is the story that shaped how Cleopatra has been remembered ever since, as the seductress who destroyed a great Roman, the woman whose flight doomed Antony. But strip away the propaganda and a different, quieter picture shows through. A queen who bet her kingdom on a Roman general, who helped plan a desperate breakout from an impossible position, who executed her part of it and got the treasure out, and who has been called a coward for 2,000 years by the friends of the man who beat her, and a general who was not doomed by her flight so much as by his own decision to follow it, to leave his men and chase the sail, and in doing so, to prove every word of Octavian's propaganda true. Why did Cleopatra flee? The most honest answer is the one the legend never allows. She fled because that was the plan, and it may have been the only sane move left on the board. The tragedy of Actium is not that she ran. It is that Antony ran after her, and that the man who followed the purple sail out of the battle left behind, on the burning water, everything that had made him worth following. The next one on this channel stays in these same waters, but jumps back 4.5 centuries, to Aegospotami, where Athens lost an entire war and its empire in a single afternoon when its fleet was caught on a beach with its crews ashore.